Hi everyone, I'm back. I've been away for a couple weeks resting and relaxing, but I decided today that it would be a good time to make another video. So this video is going to be like the last two. It's just continuing in my videos on the intersections between tarot and 20th century philosophy. Last time we looked at Roland Barthes, the work of Roland Barthes, and we looked at the distinction between plaisir and jouissance as a way of understanding the cups. And so, but I thought today that I would change suit, which is actually a very apt phrase for what I'm doing here, and go with the swords. And so today we're looking at the Eight of Swords in relation to the ideas of a French philosopher named Michel Foucault. And Foucault was one of those philosophers who, even outside of the academy, some people have heard of. He's permeated different ways. Certainly not as much as like Freud, for example, but still, you might have heard of Foucault before, and if you have, you know that Foucault was mostly concerned with power. Lots of Michel Foucault's work is about power and how power transforms depending on the epoch in which it exists. And so the swords that I'm looking at today is the Eight of Swords. This is it from the Rider-Waite Tarot. And I want to look at it in relation to Foucault's idea of Panopticism. This is probably one of his most well-known theories, and I think it's very useful to think about this idea when the Eight of Swords comes up. It adds a lot more, it adds much more complexity to the card when you think about it from this philosophical perspective. So typically the Eight of Swords, the meaning is being trapped in a situation or feeling trapped in a situation, even if it's not a real one. So for example, on this, in the Rider-Waite image, which is usually pointed out, I think this comes from Rachel Pollack in 78 Degrees of Wisdom, but she says, the woman's feet aren't bound. This looks like a dire situation, but the woman's feet aren't bound. The swords aren't all around her. She really could walk away at any moment, except that she's just being blindfolded, so she doesn't know how free she actually is. And you see this kind of imagery represented over again. So here is the Eight of Swords from the Enchanted Tarot by Amy Zerner and Monty Farber. And in this one, it's slightly different. So you have the figure who's being, sorry about the glare, but you have the figure who is being sort of quarantined or trapped by all of these different swords, but she's still holding one. And I don't know how well my camera's going to pick that up, but she's still holding a sword. Even though she's surrounded by all of these other swords, she's got one still in her hand, which means she could fight her way out if she wanted to. So that's the usual meaning of the Eight of Swords, is a situation where you find yourself trapped, but it's not real, or there's more options available to you than you realized. And this is very similar to Foucault's theory of Panopticism. So for Foucault, Panopticism arose as a transformation of power as society evolved. So the easiest way to think about Panopticism is like this. So imagine, and I think this comes from Sandra Bartke's Feminism and Foucault. Imagine it like this, that in how did she put it? That in, so let's say there's a king, right? And the king has a person, like at a wooded area that peasants are not allowed to go and hunt on. And if a peasant is caught, he or she is going to be executed on that land. If a peasant is caught poaching on the king's land, that peasant's going to be executed. But it still happened all the time, because punishment was based on being caught. Law and power was being exercised over people based on what people could see. If you were actually physically caught, then you would get punished, but you knew that if you didn't get caught, then there wouldn't be any kind of repercussion. So, and Foucault, at the beginning of his book Discipline and Punish, talks about this sort of thing, that prior to the rise of Panopticism, punishment was very spectacular. It was, everyone was supposed to know about it. People were executed in the square. Power was maintained over people because there was the opportunity of them being caught, and if they were caught, they knew that something bad was going to happen to them. So that's how they were regulated. But Foucault theorizes Panopticism as the way that power exercises itself today. So many hundreds of years later, power has transformed to the degree that punishment is no longer based on being caught and being punished for something, but in fact we punish ourselves. And he calls this Panopticism. The Panopticon is actually a kind of prison. It's an architectural design by a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham, who also worked heavily on this idea. But Jeremy Bentham suggests, so a Panopticon is a prison, and I won't go into the details, but it's basically a prison where inmates can be seen at any time by all of the guards. There's surveillance set up in such a way so that inmates can be seen at any time, but they never know when they're actually being watched. So think about that. Inmates who are in their cells can be seen at any time. They never know, but they never know certain when they're being watched and when they're not being watched. So, because they never know for certain when they are being watched, they act as if they are being watched all the time. So they start to regulate their own behavior and act according to the laws and the rules and the disciplinary structures of the prison, even though they're not actually being watched all the time. But the term is internalizing the jailer. They internalize the jailer. They make the jailer part of their mental structure. They start acting according to the jail's wishes only because they can never know when they're actually going to be punished. So they at all times are on their best behavior to make sure that in those chance moments when they are being watched, they will not be punished for that. So Foucault uses the panopticon as a metaphor for how power exercises itself today. When people are existing in society, when people are walking down the street, they are acting as though everyone else is watching them. Because at any time we could be, judged. And this has actually become a very real thing with the rise of security cameras that are everywhere. So, maybe you don't shoplift in a store because you don't know if you're actually on camera or not. Now, in all likelihood, could stores at all times screen all people 24 hours a day? No, they can't. But because there's the possibility of us being watched, we act as though we are always being watched in the store and on our best behavior. And Sandra Bartke has extended this to women. She explains a lot of things about why women act the way they do under patriarchy according to Panopticism, because women can be on display and judged by men at any time, right? A woman in a public space where there are men can be judged at any time for her femininity, can be judged at any time for adhering to her gender roles and all sorts of things like that. So women act that way all the time. And of course that's not to say that women don't resist it, but this is the case for almost anyone. And so the image, if we go back to the Eight of Swords, the image of the person who's trapped but could get away at any time but chooses not to, a difficult situation that is actually imaginary, is very in line with this notion of panopticism. If panopticism is internalizing the jailer, we walk through life on our best behavior because we know what if when we act out someone is watching us and catches us? Then in that case we are panoptic subjects, I guess you could say. So the person who won't walk away from the swords, who's feeling bound and trapped, has internalized the jailer. That's one way. When this card comes up, that's always what I think about, is if it's for myself, how am I acting according to social conventions? How are social conventions regulating my behavior to the degree that I'm policing myself at this point, and I am not resisting because I'm too afraid that I'm being watched? An image that I think really conveys this well is the Eight of Swords from the Anna K Tarot. And by the way, let me just give a short plug. The Anna K Tarot is one of the best that I have ever encountered. If you do not have a copy of the Anna K, I highly suggest it. This is the second edition. It's in print right now. You can get it fairly easily, and it's wonderful. So anyway, it's just highly, highly emotive. But in this image, so it's similar to the others, but in this image you have the perfectly healthy and free individual standing and looking in the mirror at a image that's very similar to the Rider-Waite. So you can see how close those things are. And I think that this just, when I saw, this is one of the reasons that I wanted this deck, because it so effectively captures that notion of we're not really trapped, we're not really under power or under duress, either socially or interpersonally. We just think that we are, because we have been socialized and brought up in a panoptic society where, because we could be watched and judged by others at any time, we act according to social norms and conventions at all times. We are always sort of in this trapped situation, even though in actuality we aren't. We just see it that way. We see ourselves that way. And that is what curtails resistance in relation to social inequity and all sorts of things like that. So the Eight of Swords, in relation to Panopticism, I think that to put those two ideas together is very helpful, both in relation to tarot traditions, so the Rider-Waite image, or if you choose to use element and suit, eights being kind of constriction and double structure, and swords being of the mind, structuring the mind. is very clearly in line with Foucault's idea of Panopticism itself. So again, that was from Foucault's Discipline and Punish. I guess I've decided I'm going to start doing book suggestions along with these ideas. For those of you at home who would like to learn more, you can check out Foucault's Discipline and Punish. And then also I quoted, I sort of worked on Sandra Bartke's work about how Foucault can help feminism understand how power relations work. But anyway, something to think about, food for thought, something to chew on the next time the Eight of Swords comes up is, how am I being a panoptic subject? How have I internalized social norms to the point that they are controlling me and I am policing myself rather than having to have someone else police me and my spirit and my freedoms? So anyway, hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, leave me a comment. And if you like these videos, leave me a comment too. One person, thank you, one person suggested that they liked my videos on my comments page, so thank you very much for that. Hopefully it'll attract more individuals, and I'll see you next time.